I picked up a passenger who spoke to the dead. This time of night is only for the drunks and the madmen, my wife, Samantha, had told me when I started working the late shift. And most of the time, she was right. But driving at night was still better than navigating the heavy traffic of mornings and afternoons. I was a night owl by nature, so it suited me well. I'd take the car out around 7 p.m., turn on the app, and pick up passengers until 4 a.m. Samantha and I barely saw each other. She'd leave for work at 6. Not that we'd been talking much over the past few months anyway. It was about 3:30, and I figured the next passenger would be my last. The best fares were usually airport pickups, so I waited nearby. Thankfully, someone came up soon enough. His name was Simon, a man in his 60s with snow-white hair, dressed in a black suit. The strange thing about him was that he carried no bag whatsoever. I followed the app's route. It was a long but lucrative ride to a neighborhood on the city's edge, full of old colonial houses lining narrow streets. A place for elderly folks mostly. I kept quiet at first. Experience had taught me that the best way to avoid a 1-star rating was to let the passenger start the conversation. After a while, noticing a rosary hanging from my rearview mirror, the man asked if I was Catholic. I nodded, explaining that I hadn't been going to church for a while, but wanted to return eventually. I was a priest for 30 years, he shared, but I left the clergy 10 years ago. I asked why, but Simon fell silent, as if he hadn't heard. 1 star, here I come. After a few minutes, he spoke again. It was the day I first saw that house, he said. After I learned the truth, I knew I couldn't go back, he whispered, tears filling his eyes. I figured he might be one of those madmen Samantha warned me about, so I kept quiet. It's exhausting hearing them all the time, Simon said, wiping his tears. Right now, I can only hear a child repeating something about Speed Racer, he confessed. I slammed on the brakes and turned around. What did you just say? I demanded. Simon, his face now serious, asked, You know this child, don't you? My son Jonathan passed away 4 months ago. Speed Racer was what I used to call him when he was playing with his toy cars. He was 8 years old. Trying to dismiss what I'd just heard, I kept driving, determined to give him that 1-star rating. The man was crazy, I assured myself. I speak to the dead, Simon told me, and it all started when I entered that house. I sped up, eager to end the ride. Your son wanted me to tell you it's not your fault. His words landed painfully, and I snapped, shouting at him to shut up. I wasn't buying into his act. The house finally came into view, large, old, with a Victorian architecture that only added to its haunted aura. I parked and told him to get out. Come with me, and you'll see your son again, he said, stepping out of the car. I sat there, letting his words sink in. I missed Jonathan so much. Through the window, I saw Simon waiting by the door, watching me still. I got out and walked toward him in silence. Guilt is the reason we stay behind, he explained. You passed in that accident as well, son. Now, it's time to move. Simon opened the door, and a bright light came out, blinding me. In that moment, it all came back. The car crash, the pain, the overwhelming despair. I looked back, but my car was gone. It felt like it had never been there. I stepped inside the house, feeling Jonathan's hand slip into mine.